Hello, friends. David Vos here, and it's good to see everybody today. Well, it's been a while since we have had a video. So I'm going to get back into making videos. And I'm out here in Oklahoma. Been working on trying to get my trailer up the hill. It's been raining every day, just about, since I got here. Flooding, I guess. And so I have to, I wanted to get my trailer all the way up to the back of my property. It was real muddy, and I couldn't drive it up there because of the mud. So I've been cranking on a come-along, get it up there, and I've been real busy. So I just want you to know that I didn't want to stop doing videos all this time. I've had it in mind that I wanted to get back into this series that we've been talking about. And I'm very sorry that I couldn't get back in sooner. But we're going to get back into it now, and we're going to start doing these videos. Because I think, in my opinion, I think this is probably, if not the most fascinating subject in the world, it's very informative. I mean, I can't say that it's the most important subject because our salvation and who is God and who are we and how do we get our prayers answered and all of these things are very important. We found out that we weren't worshiping the correct God. There was just so much confusion in the Christian church. We didn't understand what it meant when it says that Jesus died for our sins. And this is stuff we've been learning. All of it. So important to understanding not just the Bible, but the Bible then is the ancient wisdom that the ancient ones put down in Holy Writ for our generation. That's what the Bible says. Is it true? Is the Bible really true? What we're going to find out today is going to blow your mind. Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, Native Americans, everybody, listen up. It's true. I'm going to prove it. I'm going to prove that in this series, we're going to prove that the Bible is really very important to all nations on the face of the earth. That it is the last revelation. I don't think it's the last revelation. That's not what I meant to say. But it is, well, for the last 2,000 years, it's been the revelation that has sort of held us together, given us some sort of anchor point to the ancient wisdom and to these ancient truths. But it was written down like an excerpt out of the ancient wisdom. So you can go back to India and read the Bhagavad Gita, and you can go to Egypt and read the ancient hieroglyphs, and you can go to Samaria, and you can go to the Aztecs, and you can find all of the same wisdom. But what we're going to find out is the reason for that. Because this is one world, we're one nation, we're one race. And Israel, we're going to find out, is all peoples on the face of the earth. And so all the religions on the face of the earth are products of this, our Father in heaven, who has tried from time to time to enlighten mankind. And it's all part of a great big conspiracy to love us, to enlighten us, and to help us. So, the Bible then is more or less a book that is kind of written down in a simple form. I always thought the Bible was a big book. Growing up, it was like, oh, that's a big book. And it says you've got to read the Bible from the beginning to the end. And saying, whoa. But, it really isn't that big. It's big. But compared to all the Sumerian tablets and all this other stuff that we could be reading, I mean, good grief, there's a whole bunch more books that we didn't even have in our Bible. The Apocrypha, Nag Hammadi Library, the Dead Sea Scrolls. All of these things are related to the Bible. And then we find out now that the Bible is a story that's told in every nation on the face of the earth. So how is this all related? What is this all about? Well, I don't even know where to begin, really, except that we need to just, I guess, begin with where kind of we left off. That Israel is 12 tribes. You probably know all of the nations have this 12 somewhere in their ancient history. Remember, the Greeks had the 12 gods of Olympus. What we're going to find out is that the Greeks are the Jews, are Israel. Oh man, I know you think that we're just making this up, but the African people are Israel. The Native American people in America here is Israel. The Europeans are Israel. We're going to do a series of videos to trace all of these peoples, all of these religions. We've already talked about how the Shinto religion in Japan is just the religion of Israel. They've got the Ark of the Covenant, they've got the temple, they've got Mount Moriah, they've got the priesthood, they've got the garb. There's Hebrew letters in the Japanese writings. We've already covered that a little bit, but we're going to get deeper into that in Buddhism, where it came from, Zoroastrianism, where it came from. So we're going to cover this Israel and where they went a little differently than you've probably ever heard before, because up to now, everybody's just kind of searching for an answer as to who is Israel and what's the Bible talking about, because it's a mystery. The Apostle Paul says that there's a great mystery, and Israel's like a tree, and some of the branches were grafted or were broken off, and that other branches were grafted into it, so that when all the Gentiles come in, then all Israel will be saved. It's a little bit of a mystery, just the way he says that, because it's a little bit difficult to understand how Israel will be saved by bringing in Gentiles. He never really explains that. Well, the fact that he mentions it as a great mystery, then we can start putting things together and realize that what he's saying is that there's something in the Old Testament that's sort of written in a mystery that we wouldn't be able to really understand. Now, it's not just the Bible that's written in a mystery. All of our history is a mystery. Who we are is a mystery. The coming of the Messiah was a mystery to the Jews. They didn't know who he was going to be. To this day, there's a lot of mysteries still going around because we still have not yet understood a lot of what the apostles were trying to say. They were explaining these scriptures. So, don't expect to read the Old Testament and just assume that, well, it's just about this little group of people called Jews. And they lived in Jerusalem and they had a temple. And Jesus came and sort of reprimanded them and started a Christian church. Now they're all going to go to hell if they don't believe in Jesus. And there's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. That's not really all correct. We've been missing out on this mystery. It's much deeper. There's 12 because we have 12 in astrology. There are 12 houses in astrology. And in each of the houses, there are 3 deacons. And as we've said many times before, there are 72 deacons in this numerology, in this astrological esoteric wisdom. All of the numbers are in there. We get 144,000 by a multiple of these numbers. There's 60 seconds. There's 60 minutes in an hour. 6 times 6 is 36, 360 degrees. And Moses led the children of Israel for 40 years around in the desert. So 40 times 360 is 144,000. See, it's a multiple of all of these numbers. 7 is in there because there's 7 days in a week. And there's 52 weeks in a year. 360 days is a year. So, you see, all of the numbers represent not just something called time in this calendar, but it represents everything we are. See, the whole of all of the numbers is a circle. And in that circle, you can divide it into 12. And so that's the whole. So there's 12 tribes. That's everybody. And there's the book of Revelation talks about this temple that has 12 gates. And people will come in and go out no more. That temple is the body. See? Now, we've always known that this temple had 3 compartments. The Gentiles could come to the first, and then you had to be an Israelite to go into the second. You had to be a priest to go into the high priest to go into the most holy. So there have always been these layers and these mysteries. The apostles said that this whole temple thing was a mystery. It's trying to explain how this physical world, this carnal world, is ruled over by this particular God. He's got all these laws, and we couldn't enter in because we weren't worthy, because he was wrathful and angry. And so Moses was the author of this law. And all of the stuff that he wrote down, he had to put a veil over his face when he came down off the mountain. The people couldn't look at him because he had just had communication with the divine. And so he had to veil it. And this is what the Old Testament is. It's a veil. It's symbolic, and it's representing things that are mysteries. So in these great mysteries that the apostles are trying to explain, briefly, they don't get into it real deeply. The apostle Paul says, look at how I understand the mysteries. And he mentioned 7 different mysteries. Basically, he talked about Christ and the church. And the church would be the bride of the Christ. Some sort of a mystery. In other words, the whole arrangement there where Israel married Jehovah and was purchased was an illustration of how we're all in bondage to the laws of our husband, this God of this world. He's a wrathful God. And then it says that Jesus came and redeemed us and purchased us. And we're going to be the bride of Christ. And he says, you're not my slaves, because the slave doesn't know what his master is doing, but you know all things that I do. So, you see, now we're in a different arrangement. So we have to understand then from the Old Testament what all of these symbols mean and what the reality is. So according to the Old Testament, we had these 12 tribes. And see, Jacob had 12 sons. We're going to find out is that this story, remember the 12 gods, the Olympian gods? Well, in the Greek mythology, you have a god named Zeus. And Zeus's father was Kronos. Well, remember, Kronos had 12 sons. That's Jacob with his 12 sons. And so Jacob's son, Judah, is Zeus in the story with the Greeks. The Greeks believed that their father Zeus was a man who birthed the kings. Their kings, people that came and ruled over Athens and the Milesians, over Troy. These gods came from Judah. Historians talk about this, but we've never been told any of this stuff. It's hard enough for us to read the Bible, let alone go back and read all the history, Greek history, Spartan and Diodorus and these Herodotus and these other historians tell us that there were really 2 exoduses from Egypt. You got the exodus that Moses led, and you've got another exodus that happened before that when they left on ships. Now, that exodus wasn't the people, it was the kings, the elite. Remember, down in Egypt, Joseph ruled, because he went down into Egypt first. And then his father came down, and 70 souls all entered into Egypt. And those 70 souls all came out of the loins of Jacob. And 70 is the number of the nations. So you see, all the nations come out of Jacob. This is why Abraham is given a promise that he will be the father of a multitude of nations. And we find out in Revelation chapter 7 what that means. A multitude of nations. It means every tribe and every tongue and every people on the face of the earth. A great multitude. Same word, multitude. A great multitude, which no man could number. That's what God told Abraham. That promise that you will be the father of a multitude was given to Isaac. And then that was the birthright, see? To be the father, you're the one who's the firstborn, and you're going to be the heir of all of these people. So it went on to from Abraham to Jacob, or from Abraham to Isaac and then to Jacob. And then Jacob gave that blessing of the birthright to Joseph, one of the tribes. That's not the tribe of Judah. Judah got a different blessing. The promise that, or the blessing that Judah got was that he would have the scepter, and it would not depart from Judah until he who has the legal right comes. So we see, Judah was going to rule over his brethren, over the world, because we just explained that the 12 is all, and the 70 nations are going to be out of Jacob's loins. So out of Jacob comes all the world. And every one of these 70 fits somewhere in one of the 12 tribes. So Judah gets this promise to be the ruler, but only until, and we're going to find out that's until Christ. That's that spiritual seed. See, that's the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. The New Testament is talking about the one who comes, who is the Christ. When we awake and we become aware of the Christ within us, which is the hope of glory, then all of these old promises are going to be fulfilled in us. We're going to be the rulers. We're going to cry out, Abba, Father, heirs in reference to this promise. And in thy seed, which is Christ. So, when you're looking at the Old Testament today, you can be sure that it's not going to be this tribe of Jews that's going to rule the world. They're not the chosen ones, because they only had a period of time. And then the one who had the legal right would come. So Judah had two sons. He had twins. He ended up having a relationship with this woman named Tamar, who pretended she was a harlot, because Judah had a couple of kids before, and they ended up dying, and they didn't bring forth the heir. So one of their wives, Tamar, was promised that she would be able to have seed brought up for her by the next son, and he didn't do it. And then the next one, he didn't do it. So finally, since they weren't going to keep their word, she dressed up like a harlot along the road, and Judah came along, and he had relations with her, believing she was the harlot. And she said, "What are you going to pay me with?" And he said, "Well, I've got my staff. You know, I'm Judah. I'm a prince. Don't worry, I can pay you." She said, "Well, I need security." So he had to give his staff and his ring. Well, he says, "Go back and pay this harlot." You know, after he got all finished and went home, he had to send his servant back to pay her. And she basically was saying, "Look, I'm going to keep the staff, because I want everybody to know that I had relations with you, and the child that's in my womb is your son. He's the heir." And that child turned out to be twins. It was Zerah and Pharez. Now, when the two children were being born, Zerah stuck out his hand. The midwife, she's like wanting to find out which one's going to be first, so she ties a red ribbon around his wrist. And just about the time she gets that tied real good, his hand pulls back through, and Pharez comes out. This is the other kid. He comes out first. So now what are you going to do? Which one's first? There was a struggle in the womb. These two children represent the flesh and the spirit. And so today, we have a world that's being ruled over by carnal kings and by earthly human beings. We're not being ruled over by Christ. We're being ruled over by Jews. And they all, now you may think, because you remember, King David was from the child Pharez. Jesus was from Pharez. He's the one that actually came out first. Although, remember, it was Zerah who really broke through the womb first, and they put the red ribbon around it. Because you see, the first child that's going to rule, that thinks he's got the right to rule, is going to be this physical carnal world. And so for thousands of years, we've been under the bondage of these kings, these earthly kings. Now remember something else that Judah was given. And it says that the law would be with him. He would have the law beneath his feet. So wherever Judah would go, he would be the king, and he would be able to make the law. So everybody would have to obey him. This is the promise that was given to Judah. You can't deny that these Jews rule the world. You can't deny that they are Judah. But there's two lines. The first line was Zerah. So now, Joseph is down in Egypt, and he's reigning. Remember, he went down first before the other children went down. And he ends up marrying the daughter of On. Sometimes it calls her the daughter of Potiphar. And On is the same as the Sumerian An, or Anu, which is a god, an ancient god. The Greeks had the same teachings. They talk about Julius Caesar traces his lineage back to Annius, who slept with the goddess Diana. It was a child of the gods. Well, you see, the story is a legend that goes back to certain people, that goes back to Judah in Egypt during the first Exodus. When Joseph was not known by that Pharaoh, the southern Ethiopian Pharaoh. Remember, there's two kingdoms of Egypt. There was the Ethiopian, the southern kingdom, and then the northern kingdom. Israel ruled the northern kingdom up in Goshen. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they were the great rulers, the great pharaohs. But so Joseph then united the entire kingdom, and all of Egypt, south and north, were all united under one throne, and Joseph was the ruler. And Joseph had a dream that all the 11 stars bowed down to his star. All the other 11 blades of grass bowed down to his star. That means both carnally and spiritually, because the stars are spiritual and the wheat stalks are the earthly blessings. Same thing with the blessings that Moses saw when he says that when they're with Abraham, that his seed would be like the stars of heaven and also like the sands of the sea. It's both carnal and spiritual. So all of these stories have fulfillments in a physical, carnal way and in a spiritual way. So Joseph then rules for a long time, and Israel ruled for almost 500 years down there in Egypt. And then one day, the southern part of Egypt down in Ethiopia, they decided they didn't want this unified kingdom, and they wanted to rule themselves, and they wanted to get rid of the children of Joseph. They didn't know Joseph. A Pharaoh arose that didn't know Joseph. And so he began to persecute them. Well, after Joseph died, his son Ephraim was in line to get those blessings, but not the blessings of the rulership which was given to Judah. Because Jacob put his hands on Ephraim and said, this is going to be your son, Joseph, and he's going to get the blessings of the deep, and he's going to have all the cattle and all the gold and all of the blessings. But I want Judah to rule until Shiloh come. And of course, Judah had the two kids, Zerah and Pharez. So after Joseph died, Judah died, then his son Zerah became the king. And this is documented by Diodorus, Spartan, Herodotus. The Jews ruled down there in Egypt. And like I said, they said there was two exoduses, because when these pharaohs rose up, they didn't know Joseph, and they didn't know or didn't want Israel to have any authority and to reign down there. Well, they all left on ships. They left in Dan's ships, because remember, Dan dwelt and continued to dwell in ships. Dan dwelt by the sea, and it's prophetic that he would always take off in his ships and circle the earth, and you could find where Israel went by following Dan. So we're going to find where Israel went, and then we're going to understand what it all means here. This is what this whole series is going to be about. We're going to trace, where is Israel? Who are they? Is it a racial thing? Is there a certain race that's Israel? No, it's all nations. But we're going to find some surprises here. So, this Zerah had 4 kids. One of the kids is Dardar. He went up and became the Dardanians and founded Troy. One of his children founded the Milesians And one of his children came to be called Brutus, and he went up to Ireland, up into Ulster, and started the line, one of the lines of Zerah, that ended up being transferred to Scotland and then to Britain. And it is recorded by the historians of that time. You can go on Google and you can look this up, because we're not going to have time in this series to literally read from the historians, chapter and verse. But I'm just going to mention their names, these historians, and you can go onto Google and look them up, and you can find this information out for yourself, because it's readily available. We've just never been told. This is the most amazing stuff. We really need to know. I don't think 1 in 100 people know that there was another son, not that Pharaoh's that led to the King David, that ruled in Jerusalem. Right? Because the Bible says that it's David who's going to reign forever and ever. And Christ is the one who came from the line of David. But there's something that most people have never been told. Judah has another son that thought he was the firstborn. And this is this son that the Bible talks about over and over again, that's going to have a throne that's going to be overturned 3 times. And then it's going to meet up one day with the correct line from Jesus. Jesus is going to rule one day. He's the one who's got the legal right. We've already seen that Israel has been ruled over by Solomon and David, and all. We have all these lines of kings. But this other line has also been ruling. And the Bible talks about 2 lines. One is high and one is low. The Bible says that David shall never be in want of a man to sit upon the throne. Never. There will always be a child of David to sit upon the throne. So, the historians, as I said, all tell you that there were 4 sons of Zerah that came into the Aegean Grecian area on the island of Crete. And these children, one of them founded the city of Troy. One of them founded the Milesians, and one of them founded Ireland in the area of Ulster, the city of Ulster. And to this day, they have the symbol of the red hand and the red cord around the hand. They represent the true lineal descendant of Zerah. And so, this particular line of Zerah went into all the world, because you see, the Greek kings ended up becoming Julius Caesar traces his line also back to Troy. And so does many of the other kings all around the world. What we're going to find is that almost all of the kings, as far as we know, all of them, all the royal bloodlines of the world, all goes back to Judah. Judah, you see, is the rightful king of the world. So we've never been told. We always thought that, well, Judah was the rightful king of Israel, but that's just a little country down there in Palestine, like about the size of New Jersey. This whole Bible, so important, right? This huge temple. Oh, it's a little bitty temple, and we can't find it. But the pyramids in Egypt, 500 feet high, point to the stars and have all this ancient, powerful wisdom, and these pharaohs rule all the world and had armies that circumvented the earth. The Tartarians ruled the whole world, even over in North America. But Israel, oh wow, us God's kingdom was just the size of New Jersey. And they were just squabbling with some Canaanite tribes that, you know, evidently are just a few hundred people, right? Some Arabs out there with turbans having squabbles right over a chicken. That's not the truth. We've been lied to. Abraham was a great pharaoh. This is why he had this dispute with Abimelech down there, but who wanted his wife. Well, and Abraham says, yeah, she's my sister. Because you see, she really was his sister, because Sarah came from Laban's house, and that's where Abraham came from. So they were relatives. But what Abraham was doing, he wasn't afraid of Abimelech. Abimelech might get mad and kill me, right? No. Remember when they took Lot, his nephew? Abraham wasn't scared. He got 18 officers over legions, and he had all these armies, and they went out to battle. It was a world war. He went out to war against 5 major powers of the world. Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and the king of Babylon, and the king of Persia. And they all had this huge fight. And Abraham won that battle. So, Abraham wasn't scared. The reason that Abraham was prepared to give Abimelech his sister is because they wanted to make a pact. This is how kings would unify the kingdom. Remember how David married 700 women. He had 700 wives, and Solomon had 1,000. You don't think Israel's in all the world? We've got Solomon, who was a lineal descendant of Judah, who was promised to be the ruler of the world, having 1,000 wives, and those women went all over the place. One of them was the Queen of Sheba. Oh, buddy, there was lineal descendants of Judah all over this world. We're going to go through each and every kingdom. But right now we're talking about Greece. And so, Julius Caesar was of that line. Alexander the Great. Many of these, that's all of Greece, and Ireland, the Scythians. We're going to find out that India had these kings. Nebuchadnezzar, according to the rabbinical literature, was a child of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. He was a child of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. And, according to the rabbinical literature, Nebuchadnezzar, there's that czar again, Nebuchadnezzar, right? Caesar and Khazars and the czars of Russia and all these czars, right? Today we've got the Windsors that rule the world. But the rabbinical literature says not only was Nebuchadnezzar of Davidic descent through Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, but he was also the grandson of Sennacherib. Sennacherib was an Assyrian king. Now, how did that happen? How did the Assyrian king have something to do with the lineage of Judah? Well, because the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Assyrian kings around 602 BC was a whole different line of kings. And Sennacherib was one of them. And evidently, Assyria was defeated by this line of kings, Sennacherib and his dynasty. They defeated the Assyrians. Well, the Assyrians are the ones that took Israel captive in 721. So, it wasn't long after that these millions of Israelites that were taken up into there as captives overthrew their captors. And they began to reign in various different nations, beginning with Assyria. We know that for sure because not only the historians, but the Bible itself. It says that Daniel was of the tribe of Judah and was made governor of all of Babylon, and then also Media and Persia, 3 kingdoms that Daniel succeeded as a ruler. And he was the head of all the Magi, which is the Zoroastrian religion. And his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were also heirs to Judah. And they were also governors of satraps. And we find out in history that the Scythians, or the Sacae, which is the sons of Isaac is what they call them, they called them different things. Today we call them, a lot of times we just call them the Scythians in modern English. But they were originally called the Sacae. Sometimes they call them the Umuri. And that's how they would say Sumeria, because the Sumerians, that's the capital city of Israel. Sometimes they call them the Jimeri. And most scholars think that may be because of the Sumeri. But some scholars think that's where we get the word Germania, or Germans. So we're not quite sure, but one thing we know is that we know the cities that Israel was taken captive to. The very cities up under the Caspian Sea that they were taken captive. And we know it's those very cities that Herodotus and various historians tell us, Josephus, that the Sake lived and overthrew the Assyrians. There's all kinds of historical evidence and proof, rabbinical literature, historians, and everything that tells us that Nebuchadnezzar, the Assyrian kings, were all Israelites. And so this then gets to be very, very interesting. And it's very important that we put all this together so that we can understand, because we've got all this stuff going around. There are theories. Listen, we don't need theories. We need to figure this out. Because if we go around telling, you see, there's a theory going around that Israel is the white people. We're the chosen race. Wow, there's a lot of, there's a lot of information out there that would really make one believe that's true. But what we're going to find out is that there's a bunch of things that they've got kind of mixed up and discombobulated so that they're kind of being misled. As we've said in some of the other videos, the African peoples are also said to be children of Israel. Joseph Smith said that the Native Americans here in America were also children of Israel. So we've got to figure this out. Because, you see, this can lead to a thing where it's like, okay, if we could prove that the African American was Israel, and all the promises of this book applied to African Americans and not to white people, then what are you going to do with white people? Well, you start thinking, well, maybe the white people are bad. They're all bad, right? That's the devil's kids, right? Come on, you can really start getting off. Well, doesn't it look like that? I mean, to a lot of individuals that may be in Africa that came over here on boats as slaves, they might think, well, that sounds pretty good. That makes sense, right? But what we don't understand is that the reason why people are being put under slavery, the reason why people are starving and there's all this war, is because this book and the God of this Old Testament, Jehovah, he made a law that says you have to go out and kill everybody. Every man, woman, and child. That's why Genghis Khan went and took soldiers and started off in Mongolia and went all the way over to the Ural Mountains and just massacred every man, woman, and child, because he was an Israelite of the same princely reign dynasty that goes back to Judah. Buddha was of this princely caste of the Sake. We can prove that from history. But in his case, he gave up his princely power, and he sat down and he said, I need to find God. And he found the truth, and he began to become a teacher of wisdom. Because you see, our Father in heaven didn't leave us just out there in the middle of nowhere without the truth. There's prophecies in this book that we're going to talk about that is going to explain how our Father in heaven has a plan. There is the Old Testament and there is the New Testament. There is the God of this world that's blinding the minds of the unbelievers and makes slavery and all this that's going on. And then there's love. And then there's our Father in heaven that loves us. And he is love. The New Testament is about a man named Jesus, who is the Messiah, who's of the line of David. And he's the one who has the legal right. And he didn't teach racism. He said, you see that Samaritan? That's your neighbor. Jews wouldn't have anything to do with him. Individuals that were brought back into the land, they weren't really Israel. And so they thought they were Canaanites or some other, they were unclean or they weren't teaching the truth or something. So Jews didn't have anything to do with the Samaritans. But Jesus said, no, that's your neighbor. Even your enemy you're supposed to love. See, but the God of the Old Testament, Jehovah, says you got to kill your enemy. A tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye. A life for a life. Kill every man, woman, and child. And if they don't believe in our teachings, kill them. But Jesus says if somebody doesn't receive you, just shake the dust off your feet and walk away. Turn the other cheek. Forgive. This is a whole different teaching. So what we want to do is understand who Israel is, because we have to understand why there's been all of this pain and all of this suffering and all this war. See, did our God command this? No. Our Father in heaven did not command this. So we're going to go through this and we're going to find out where Israel is, because turns out the great revelation, the book of Revelation, chapter 7, says that our Father loves all of us. Every tribe, every tongue, and every nation. And you black people out there, white people aren't just inherently bad. See, we're deceived just as everyone else on this planet is deceived. Nobody knows the truth. We don't know what we're doing. This God Jehovah has got the wool pulled over all of our eyes. It wasn't primarily white people that was doing all of this. There were all kinds of people. Genghis Khan, Mongolians, Nebuchadnezzar, and he wasn't white. And guess what? Solomon wasn't white either. And yet Solomon had 1,000 wives and was having confrontations with other nations, and there was wars. And David had 700 wives, and it says that the Lord taught his hands for warfare. And he wasn't white. So this idea of killing and war comes from this book. And the apostles tell us that it was just a tutor that led us to Christ. It was a schoolmaster. It was a curse upon mankind. And Jesus came and freed us from this and opened the eyes of the blind and gave liberty to those that were bound. So we've got to figure out what this liberty is, and we've got to be able to figure out our history so we can find out who we are. So I want to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt and dispel this notion that somehow or another only white people are the chosen ones, or only black people. And I want to explain why it is that so many people have suffered so deeply and so ruthlessly over the last thousands of years, and why this is going on, how we can stop it. Because we've got to receive the love of the truth that we might be saved. So we're going to go through, in this series, we're going to prove, we're going to show from the scriptures and from history that the Greeks, the Irish, the Scottish, the British, the Nigerians in Ethiopia, Egypt, India, China, Japan, Russia, all of these kingdoms and many, many more, the Persians and the Iraqis and people, the natives of Australia, all of the peoples of the world, all can trace their lineages back to Israel. But you got people today that are trying to figure out, well, what tribe am I? Well, where's Reuben? You know, where's the tribe of Asher? All these different tribes. But you see, here's why you cannot find where Asher went, or where, you know, where Reuben went. Because, or Simeon. Some of these tribes don't have a specific, they're not going to be a specific nation. It says they're scattered in Israel. Really only two tribes. There's one tribe we call Judah, but that consists of Benjamin, much of the Levites, and Judah. So if you were a Benjamin, you would usually just be called a Judean or a Jew. So it's not like you can go find a Benjaminite. You know, you might find somebody that can trace themselves back to Benjamin. It's possible. Simply because the Jews they've known who they've had their identity for a long time. So sometimes, you know, Levites can trace their line today because they were never lost like the other 10 tribes. But when you're going to go and you're going to find Israel, you're not going to find Asher or Reuben because they're scattered in Israel. What you're going to find is the identity of Ephraim. He got the blessing above his brethren of the dew of heaven, the land, and all of these amazing blessings were given to this one son. And that son went down into Egypt and came out a mixed multitude. And that son, it says in the book of Hosea, was scattered like seed in all the earth to become a multitude of every nation, tribe, people, and tongue. And Reuben and Asher and Simeon, they're all scattered in that one tribe, or the nation of Israel, or the nation of Ephraim, or the nation of Samaria. You can use different words, but you're not going to find Reuben specifically somewhere in the world. He's scattered amongst Israel. So there are certain prophecies that were going to be given to Jews. Certain prophecies are going to be given to Ephraim. Ephraim then is not just the black people, nor is it just the white people. But we're going to trace Ephraim. They went up into Assyria. They became the Saki. They became the Umari. They became the Chinese. They became the Japanese. They became the Mongolians. They became the Russians. They became the Europeans. They became the Ethiopians. They became Chad, Nigerians, and we have traditions and historical evidence that they went to all these places. And they're going to get the main blessing. We're going to find out that the tribes of Israel weren't all white. They weren't all black. Jacob had two wives, Rachel and Leah. And they had two concubines. So there was 4 different women. The 2 concubines could have been, we're not quite sure what color they were. But if they were concubines, they probably weren't white. Because Jacob was white because he came from Laban's house, which is Abraham's. Remember, the Bible tells us that Noah was a white man because it says in the Apocrypha and the other scriptures that he was white, and they thought, well, he must be a child of the gods because the Neberians were white. And we're going to explain this. That doesn't mean them superior. It just means that they're a specific race that were from this group of beings that came from the stars. So there's another child that's from this earth, and that is the indigenous children of this world. And the Sumerian tablets called them the black-headed peoples. And it says that Adam was a black-headed person. So we can tell from that, even in the Bible, it talks about Ham, and even the name Ham means the burnt one. So Laban means the white one. That's what it means. Israel was never a race. It never says in the Bible that Israel is a race. It simply says that there was a God whose name was Jehovah that didn't like a nation that came from Ham or Egypt and made them slaves. Now, you can't get around that. That's what it says. Do we appreciate that? Do we like that? No, because, you see, our Father in heaven overruled that. Even though Jehovah says, I want you to make these people slaves. And Sarah says, she's not going to have any inheritance with me. Hagar, she's an Egyptian princess. But she's not going to have, her child's not going to have any inheritance with my child. So there might have been a little bit of a racial thing going on there. But guess what? Well, Jacob comes along and has 12 kids. One of his kids goes down into Egypt, marries the daughter of On, an Egyptian princess. And guess what? The Bible tells us that that woman that Joseph married tells us her name. Her name was ASENATH. According to the rabbinic literature, like the Targums and the Talmud and stuff, they say that ASENATH was Dinah's daughter. Remember, Jacob had 12 sons, but he had one daughter, Dinah. And Dinah, we were always told that she was raped by the king of Shechem. See, a Canaanite. This Canaanite came up there and raped Dinah. And so Simeon and Levi went out and murdered all these people for what he did. And we think, well, he must have raped her and stuff. But that's not why they murdered him. It doesn't say that he raped her. They said she was defiled. But not because she was raped. Because they tried to get Dinah to leave Shechem. And Simeon says, I'll find you another husband, sister. You don't want to be with him. Well, Dinah says, no, I like him. I want to stay. See, they went out together and they laid down together by choice. Now, Simeon and Levi and some of the Israelites said, he's defiled her, only because they didn't want his child in her womb. That was to them defilement. But it didn't mean that he raped her. And so he then asked Jacob for her hand in marriage. And this is where Simeon and Levi says, oh no, Reuben didn't want that. They didn't want that. They wanted their daughter to marry somebody else. Well, Shechem was a Canaanite. He was a black man. And so Dinah's daughter was half black, probably half white. She then, because the Israelites didn't want anything to do with this child, they put her in a box and sent her down to Egypt. And Pharaoh, Potiphar, he finds this child, and his wife was barren, and so she says, I want this child, and she raised it as her own. You can imagine when she saw this little black child, and she didn't know, whose child is this? Well, it had a little plaque around his neck. It says that this child was a prince. And so she says, well, I'm going to raise this child as my own. And she did. And then when Joseph came down into Egypt, he ended up marrying Asenath, which was one of his relatives, his sister's daughter. So when Jacob goes to bless the children, Ephraim and Manasseh, which are the children of Joseph, he takes his hand and he's put his right hand on Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh. And he was going to give Ephraim the biggest blessing and Manasseh that gets the second blessing. Well, Joseph said, oh, no, father, no, Manasseh's the firstborn. You've got to put your hand on the right hand on Manasseh. And Jacob says, no, I know, my son. Manasseh will be a great nation too, but Ephraim is going to be greater. Ephraim is a child of a black man and a white woman. Ephraim is the one who gets the great blessing because you see, in the end, even though this God wants to have slavery and death and war, he teaches our hands for warfare. In the end, he always makes it work out. He's not going to allow that because there's a mystery involved. And the Apostle Paul says, do you understand this mystery? When the Gentiles become in, then all Israel will be saved. Because you see, at that moment, Jacob adopted Ephraim as his own son, and he became the 13th tribe. And this is why the United States has 13 stripes, 13 olive branches, 13 arrows. It's all part of that prophecy in Genesis chapter 49 with the arrows of Joseph. And if you look on the heraldry, you'll see that the unicorn, that represents Ephraim. He's going to push the peoples to the ends of the earth. White people didn't really do that. Genghis Khan did that. People from India, Nebuchadnezzar, the Africans, the Tartarians are the ones that pushed the peoples to the ends of the earth. The Tartarians were the largest nation on the face of the earth, from China all the way to North America. So you see, the 13th tribe is the last child. Ephraim is the last child. He's not the oldest. He's not the second to the oldest. He's not the second to the youngest. He's the very youngest child that was adopted by Jacob. The last child of Jacob, which is the 13th child, which is the last king that's going to be born on the earth, which is the United States of America. And that child, the United States, is a multitude of nations, friends. It is a multitude of all nations, tribes, and tongues that fulfills the blessings that Jacob gave to Ephraim. So, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. And now, remember, we're going to get really deep into this. We're going to prove so many different things. This is going to be amazing. So you really need to watch this series because it's going to answer so many questions. Not only who we are, what the gospel is, what the Bible means, what we can believe, what we can put our hope and our faith in, because we're going to find out the Bible really is true and we can put our faith in it. Because you see, our Father in heaven, you're going to, by the end of this series, you're going to know in your heart, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that our Father loves us and that he's controlling things. Because this book was written 1000 BC. These prophecies that were fulfilled in 1776, 2,520 years to the day, 7 times after Israel went into captivity in 721. Count it. 1776. The seal on the dollar bill tells you that you're Ephraim. All of this could not have been by accident. And we're going to show that our Father in heaven loves us. And he's got everything in control. And Jesus was real. And he walked this earth. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go, friends. And we're going to get into this. Start doing this series. We'll see you again tomorrow. Have a good one.